Um,
Okay.
There we go.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. We have a full meeting ahead of us. I call to order the CCP committee meeting at 6:35 in the boardroom of OPR FHS. Please call the roll.
Ms. Alexander,
Present.
Dr. Apple,
Present.
Mr. Greenhouse, Mr. Carabella, Mr. Conley, Mr. Davis, Mr. Diggs,
Present.
Ms. Emerson, Ms. Grimes,
Present.
Ms. Janney, Ms. Jones, Ms. Lamb,
Present.
Dr. Livingston, Ms. McQueen, Mr. Noreen,
Present.
Ms. Newman,
Present.
Ms. Parker,
Present.
Ms. Schreiber, Ms. Stevens, Ms. Walters.
Present.
Please, any public comments?
None.
Anybody signed up?
Nope.
Thank you. We'll move to approval of minutes. I move to approve the February 14th, 2024 CCB committee meeting minutes as presented. Are there any corrections or adjustments that need to be made?
I have a correction. It's on page 6. I don't have the minutes in front of me. It's on page 6. It's the second paragraph. And it says there's something in there about the lines share, and it's spelled LINES, and
Should be LI.
it should be LION apostrophe S.
Okay.
That was this.
On page 6, you said?
Page 6, second full paragraph, right in the middle of the paragraph.
Okay, I'll get those corrected and upload the new version on Board Docs. Thank you for that.
Perfect. With that correction, then can I hear a second? Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? You guys have it. And that leads us to our main topic for tonight, which is discussion of the BDP. We're going to Linda.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight is the meeting that is slated for us to discuss our behavior education plan. And this is the document that this group predominantly gathers to meet about, which is our code of conduct for our school that helps us and helps our deans to address discipline as incidents happen within our building. As you may know, we went about, I don't remember how many years ago, but I want to say it was while we were in COVID. So it was like the 2021 school year. We started our BEP. We didn't get to start it fully in person at that time, but we actually put it in place in order to be very responsive to Senate Bill 100, which put restrictions on out-of-school suspensions of students due to discipline. So the push is for and is for more restorative action in terms of helping our students to learn better ways of behaving and understanding how they can confront conflict when it arises, as instead of sending them out of the school in order to try to repair anything that has happened. So tonight, we are actually going to work on a different objective than we usually do, because we usually come forth with changes we want to make to the BEP. I'm happy to report we don't see anything we need to change in the BEP, which means we found we're kind of settled in what we have here in terms of what it says, but we want more people to become versed in how the restorative part works within the discipline system that we have so far. So our objective tonight is to better understand the application of restorative justice principles and how that works within our behavior education plan. I will say that there are times when events will happen in our school that we still get a pervasive attitude that something needs to happen to this kid. And so we're trying to figure out and make sure that everyone understands something is happening. It's not the old something we may have been used to. So that's what we're going to dig into tonight. And I'm going to turn this over to David Lorraine, who's going to give us the summary of the principles, and then we will be co-leading this session this evening.
Okay, guys, everybody should have a copy of the behavior verification plan in front of them. Looking, I'm not sure if you see page numbers on yours, so
No.
we'll have to navigate a little differently. So we'll just go through from the beginning. You should see in the dark box, it's really on your third page. After the overview, you have guiding principle.
Page 3.
It's on my book, it's page 3. It's page 3 for you, yeah?
Page 3.
Yep, so it looks like this.
Okay, everybody looking, there should be 8 star boxes in front of you guys. We want to emphasize that these are, at the front of the book for a reason. Starting with, we are grounded in a strong focus on engagement and learning. This is the school. But going deeper into the fact that we are dealing with discipline, whenever possible, we still avoid exclusionary practices, which means that we are trying to keep the students here in the building because our strong belief is that sending the students out of the school on an out-of-school suspension does not really benefit them. That's considered a punitive measure. It is a missed opportunity for them to gain learning from the event that occurred, from the disciplinary event that occurred. So we utilize teaching and intervention over consequences and punishment. And really, there is no such thing as zero tolerance. Aggressive discipline for students that persist in the same behavior is the name of the game. But we also like to weave in strong school family partnerships and really surround the kid with every available resource in order to get them to learn from whatever went wrong. So that is these are guiding principles, and sometimes people are not looking at this page, they stray away from that. They think of the harm that was done. They think about, as Linda was referencing, what will happen to this kid? I was harmed. My classroom was disrupted. Another student was harmed. Oftentimes, families are at the root of that concern. My child was harmed. What is going to happen to the child? And our response often is first in what is going to happen is that we are going to do as much as we possibly can to restore any harm that was done and to educate the child who made a bad decision. That doesn't always sit well. If you look at where these principles come from, a lot of it is grounded in because our society is built upon a pathway to prison. And that our prison society is very, very punitive. We don't have a lot of restorative justice. We don't have a lot of rehabilitation actually built into our societal mechanisms for when somebody does something wrong outside of the school. If you look at other countries, such as my favorite, Finland, you will find that they shy away from even having prisons. They'd rather have rehabilitation centers. So people that do wrong are not locked away from society and removed from society. They are given an opportunity to right their wrongs and to make amends whenever they can and to show that they can return to being productive members of society. We aim to do the same thing in the school building.
So I want to make sure that we're clear that things that are in writing, whether we read them and keep track of them, they are real. So sometimes I have to point us back to our guiding principles because when things happen, everything I realize in theory sounds great. It's when it's rolled out in practice. And so I have met many people in our building who will tell me how much they love this and how restorative action has to be what we focus on and what we push. And the moment it's their child, like I will have the most vehement person coming at me so vehemently about a in-school suspension that has to be served because they just don't agree. And the idea is we are doing work with students in the in-school reflection area. in order to develop their skills to not do that thing or that incident again. And when we are against it because we just don't want to have our students to have to feel anything that is adverse, then we're robbing them of the opportunity to learn how to correct the behavior. And I think we're missing that sometimes in our action towards this. And so when we look at our VEP, I'm going to take you now to the page. I want you to flip until you get to the overview of the progression of discipline. It's a page that has colors, multi-colors on it, but at the top it says overview of the progression of discipline. These are the levels to which we respond to incidents that happen within our building, okay? And they are calibrated so that we do not adversely do punitive action to students and rob them of the opportunity to learn about how to change their behavior and their actions to do a different thing next time to not end up in the same place. I'm going to go over this quickly and then I'm going to show you how this looks in terms of our charts that we use as our deans here at the school. So we have 5 levels. The first level at which is not even a referable offense. So those are things that happen that we have asked our classroom teachers at the classroom level to address within their class. And we will look at examples of what starts at a level 1, but these are very low level discipline things that can sometimes still be nerve-wracking in a class and can sometimes still disrupt the classroom environment, but we're giving students the opportunity to hear from their learning partner, which is their teacher, to understand what the community agreements are in the room, and to see if we can make the choice to abide by what we agreed to when class started, and we agreed as a class to how things would happen in this room. So it starts there at level 1. Some things start at different levels, and then some things can progress to different levels as they go through. So something that starts at a level 1 could still move to a level 2, possibly a level 3, depending on what the incident or offense is. But we give different starting levels depending on the severity of the event. And when you think severity for school, it has to be about the disruption to the learning environment, which means disrupting in the hallway can be different than disrupting in a class with 24 kids, can be different than disrupting in the auditorium with 1,700 kids, so on and so forth. So when we talk severity, even though me as a human being, I feel very disrupted and dysregulated when a student is rude to me, when we think discipline as a whole, the state is looking at how it disrupted the learning environment for multiple students when we look at what type of consequence can be given to the student. Level 2, as you see, moves from not just being at the class level, but becomes a referral that will reach the deans. So it may result, as you see in this thing, I want you to notice the word may. May result in removal from class, may result in an in-school reflection for up to 1 day. That's a level 2 offense. The reason the word may is there is because this book, as I said before, is steeped in our restorative practices. So if we work with a student, say this is a student who has disrupted a classroom several times by throwing things in the classroom, throwing a piece of paper. Teacher has addressed that, asked the student please not to do that, has conversation, may have even dropped an email or a call to a parent, made an agreement that this is not what is helpful in the classroom. The child comes back the next day, still playing, still throwing, still doing the thing, and the teacher now refers this to a dean. When the dean talks to the student, they are going to foremost go with a restorative attitude. Because again, it's not well, your teacher talked about you, now you're going to jail. That's not what we're going to do. They come to the dean, and then the dean is going to have a more serious conversation about how this is affecting the classroom when you come to do this. Like the learning environment for all of your peers, not just you, is being affected by this behavior to try to get the student to understand the harm that is being caused. Now, I know when we use the word harm that you're thinking, okay, he didn't harm anybody with a piece of paper. The harm goes to you're disrupting the learning for individuals who came to get a specific set of skills for the day. And every time your teacher has to stop to do this, it's affecting the way everyone is receiving learning. And sometimes in those environments, students start to say, that's pretty bad. probably shouldn't have done it. And then they start to think about why they did it. Oh gosh, my brother got on my nerves today and I just need to let off some steam. And so I just started throwing paper in the class and I thought it was funny. Is that, like, they unpack that with the students to figure out, is that the way we want to have fun? Is that, hoping to get the student to the point of understanding, yeah, this is pretty bad. I shouldn't do that anymore. Now, we don't ask students, go tell your teachers that you're sorry, because we don't want to force apologies on individuals, but we are trying to get the students to the point that when they see their teacher again, they feel as though they should say, I'm sorry. I did that thing. I won't do that anymore. Or get them to the point to at least let them know I've moved from the point that I was at. And I'm ready to try again. They're 14, they're 15, they're 16, they're 17. They don't always get try again better. I will never forget when I was in the classroom, I was infuriated at this little girl. Like, I just remember just seeing red and just wanted her to go away, whatever go away meant. Because at that point, I don't care who took her, just get her out of here. The next day, she came to me and she was like, hi, Miss Parker, and she just gave me a hug. And I was like, oh my God, we hate each other. Why are you touching me? That's one thing in my head. And that is when I realized every day is new to children. They come back and sometimes they've forgotten the whole thing. Like if you were to say, you don't remember what and how, and they're just like, oh, you still committed? Like they don't understand, and it's the words, because you're sitting there still like people. And that is when I realized, oh, this is not about me. Like you didn't do that to just, that was something you were going through that you just brought to class and I needed to just talk you down or get you, but they shift very quickly. And so that is what made me understand that they process in a different way when they're at the age, and I'm sure I did when I was that age too. But that's just to give you an explanation on how things can jump from there. We are working for students to get to an arrival to a place that I don't want to do that anymore, and I'm pretty sorry I did that. Sometimes because they reach that space, we don't infuse the in-school reflection. We don't then need them to sit for half a day out of class to think about what they just thought about in this unpacking session and miss class time. So we send them back to class. That can sometimes be misconstrued as they did nothing. And then don't forget that when you meet the little girl who comes to you again or sees that kid, in the mind of the adult, they're sometimes like, she, like, want you back, right? She's had this big talking to session and thinks that she's been, but to the person, if they don't know about that, they sometimes can misconstrue that as like nothing. And so one of the things we're trying to work with our deans is making sure they're communicating to our faculty, like what happened in the conversation. So you may not have sent them back to me saying, sorry, but tell me about what happened in that conversation. So I too can know that Lily was enlightened and that she's all better. And when I see her tomorrow, maybe I can approach her a different way. So we're trying to do things which we call closing the loop to make sure that teachers know something happened, even if they're not sitting in that room for half a day, to have the something happen. The restorative process allows for that to be the thing that happens in some cases. So the egregiousness of the fault also makes a difference. You move to 3, the same thing is applying, but remember for a level 3, it could result in a 1 to 3 day in-school reflection. That's a range, and it could be restorative, depending on what it was. If the child understands what's happened, it may not even occur to that, but most times when you get to a 3, you will always get at least 1 day, most probably, depending on what it was. Level 4 may result in 1 to 3 out of school suspension days. It takes a very much more egregious act to start at an out of school suspension. But do know that there is some progression in there. And I was so hoping that Simon was going to be here today because I wanted her to hear me say that she was a wonderful cast member in the musical. That musical enlightened my life. So I want to say it in front of everybody. You were great. And welcome tonight. Level 5 is more intensive administrative intervention and may result in 4 or more days of out of school suspension. Again, it has to be something on the level of an actual gun in the building to start at 5. To start at 5, like to go straight to a 5-day or an out of school suspension. And more will be said about that as we go through. But when you flip the page you're going to see something that you're gonna be using tonight as you go forward. It's the BEP and the chart that is used to identify what types of offenses actually land in what areas. When you look at this chart, just keep in mind that when you read anything, we can just start at alcohol and drugs and tobacco. The very first one is telling us that being in the possession of any tobacco product, vaping device, or a nicotine inhaler starts at a 2. So there would be no, depending on the classroom teacher to handle this in the classroom, that starts right at what a dean would start. But if you go down to the bottom with disruptive or uncooperative behavior, you see some things that start at a 1. Okay, so if they are being disruptive in the classroom and disrupting the learning, that starts at a 1 for the teacher to address. You will notice up above, if you're purchasing vapes, marijuana, those start at a 3. But just know the fact that you see the dots after, it's a progression, meaning the continuation of events like this could have this progressing for you as you go through. Okay, and you are able to peruse through this chart as we're going through this now. And David is going to lead us into our next section as we're doing that. So feel free to keep looking so that you can get an idea of what offenses lead to what responses while David tells us our next part.
As if I can actually have you flip backwards, just 2 pages to the page that says restorative practices. Okay, on this page you have just a selection of 2 types of practices. On the left side, labeled first restorative, proactive, responsive interventions. I'm sorry, and then at the bottom you have your proactive interventions. The responsive interventions typically tend to happen after the incident has already occurred. There's nothing we can do to change that. What do we do as a result of it? And we have 4 things listed there. And then you have some proactive interventions that really can be done in general, in a classroom setting, in any setting where we can get in front of students to educate them about better practices, healing interventions, talking circles, celebration circles. On the walls, key locations on the walls, if you'll be using these, I've expanded upon some of these to add a lot more practices that we actually do use in schools, and I want you to consider them as we go through this activity. So under proactive measures, we've added some things that are fairly obvious, like parent contact, to the list that's already here, but getting creative, substance abuse education is a proactive measure that we can do before a child is caught vaping, right? Anger management workshops, decision-making workshops, anti-bias education. These are things that actually do happen in the school already, and they should be considered when thinking about proactive measures. Now, reactive measures are the tough ones. Again, we can't change the misconduct that's already occurred, but we've added a plethora of reactive measures here, including out-of-school suspension. Out-of-school suspension is something that can still be considered, as Linda has gone over. However, we try to implement systems where kids can actually learn from their mistakes. We've got some things in here that may be impacted by the decision. Impact your decision on what to do, such as referral grief counseling that may be specific to the situation. Substance abuse education again is listed here. Peace circles are very, very powerful. We use them all the time in conflict situations. Stats mediation. So just to name a few, those are the available reactive measures. If there's anything that is not on the poster that you thought of, feel free to use those as well. But let's take a look at the activity that we've designed for you today. So you have 4 scenarios. And what we're going to ask you to do. Oh, so okay, so we're going to count by 4, which is assign you the scenario. Starting with Latanya, and we'll work our way around on this.
1,
2, 3, 4.
5, 4,
One.
1, sorry. 1, 2,
3,
4, 1,
2.
3.
4.
Okay, so that gives you your assigned scenario. Obviously, you're going to read your scenario very carefully. And we're asking you, after you've read it as a group, to determine the category of the behavior. Category will come from the behavior education plan. For example, those are the darkened categories at the top. The first one is alcohol, drugs, and tobacco. Determine the specific misconduct within that group. the appropriate response level, that would be level 1 through 5. And then the response or consequence. Now, this is something that you as a group should recommend based on reading the scenario. But more importantly, we're going to ask you to engage in discussion, specifically thinking about who was harmed in this scenario. In what way can restorative practices be applied? Keeping in mind that we are trying to both educate the child who committed a misconduct, but also restore the harm that was done to anybody in this scenario. And finally, what resources would be required to fully restore this situation? It's kind of a supplementary question, but something to be considered because not all of these restorative ideas are easily implemented. We're going to take about 15 minutes in that process. Does anybody have any questions?
Are there any situations where this behavioral response grid is just thrown out? Like, no, so it's always gonna fit somewhere, okay?
For the sake of equity, so that we don't just say, I like this kid, give them, I don't know, we don't do that. Everything goes by the book. For the scenarios behind, what Tanya said will be this paper for group 1, group 2, group 3, and group 4. 4.
That's right.
That's when everybody is like, no, throw it out.
We counted off by 4. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, we're starting now, you're gonna find places 15. Remember that the goal is restorative, so you'll be able to find something on the grid, but what else could be going for that? Either 4, but we're not gonna. It's on the grid. Oh, good, I don't have to talk so much, people be here, and his parents are.
Well, Diggs knows all.
I know, but so this is gonna, yeah, but so it was all, I think it's gonna always be one of the rich. So we'll let Karen do all the.
You want me to write it so easier?
Should we split the resources? Should we go send someone else? Okay. Oh, good, we'll do the premier. He was saying you'll know all the answers, because you all are the, so, okay, but this will be good to hear.
Oh, sorry.
Or just like a conversation about it, it's like.
Okay.
Like it's not as small.
Sorry. That's okay.
Yeah.
I just need to close this.
Yeah. Like that's like, let's get a talk. We don't see it.
I mean.
You get a talk.
On the chart, it would start as response level 4.
Like it's.
But-
Weapon.
So, 130 days.
1.2 grams, yeah, it automatically starts. Sorry, one to it.
Oh, hi.
It's just a provision, so.
Yeah. Like, and I think that's
Yeah.
Yes, but.
What's gonna rank?
Practice.
Am I letting no one have 5 minutes left?
obviously.
He's out of school, is that? But we can.
I'm missing what you said.
You got it.
Give me
a recommendation.
So the first thing
Yeah,
I do is determine the category of behavior.
Right over.
That's exactly what
Well, no, you're gonna find what, like, you were in the town, what has been brought to you.
Yeah.
We're right.
It's on four, so whatever. It's listed.
Oh.
So it's four scenarios. They're pretty interesting scenarios.
First thing is what the infraction.
Yeah, we have to, yes.
Let's make it more like that.
I go for category.
I usually live in our.
No,
Back to you.
I'll let you all.
I
know, pretty clear.
It's not in the.
No problem.
So, sure, yeah.
I would.
Oh, sure. We gotta be able to find. I would assume.
Yeah,
But if there was a space for it, but it should.
You know, we try to get away from those terms, like that's why sometimes it takes more reading to get to the actual.
Now, let me ask you. Does a second right rule anything?
Yes, and that's where the progressive.
Okay, two or seven.
So both are gonna fall into this category, you think it's difficult, except for the and with the level. Because so that was.
So it's right, or I think I can tell it's gonna be first place. I don't think the vaping.
You know, it's not a progressive like up and gradually.
But you're kind of big out well.
Conversations will take those things into consideration, right?
But
Does not know.
They're very different, right? Like you're yourself, that's just amazing.
I mean, I think.
So then that's where you
I
start.
think that's a scenario of like.
Something else, like the. Level is up to 1 day, you go up to 3, it's like 1 to 3 days. So
Which is why I think it's right on.
that's also, you don't have to give it 3, just if you go up to the, you know, we can.
One. It's not. Again,
Have they-
assuming that-
Like, are they restoring the harm? You know, are they ready to return to the environment? Are they showing an ability to like? Toxic impact?
Where is it say the effective?
Yes.
And then to go to that.
Right.
Okay, but this is the start from, right, oh, so then you go to left, and then
Right, and but you.
One of the two ones. That's kind of amazing.
So like.
Here.
So.
Especially when it's like a work life, like where it's.
But I know the rest. We have Okay, so when then you go like here, it goes, you go just find.
One is used, then you go to restaurant home too.
Right.
You know, so it like it should go.
Okay.
Like you can't.
Down or. So for,
Yeah.
for Rob, we have. That's the second, right, yes.
Yeah.
You're posting
Oh,
that
got it.
because it's like, what.
Right.
That would be the. And they would start at level 2, so what would be their.
Now, the question is. That we have to address, is there anything else that's
But like if one.
Like that,
You know, like all of those things play into like how you determine what the actual.
It is interesting. How one goes on and responds to the action.
That's what I.
And we have to tell them, okay. So I'm gonna write the first.
You do have to respond to applications, right? Like, you know, that takes a
You're
while.
going
Right, but you can block yourself, you can move out of the way, you can walk away, like, you know what I'm saying, punching back. And I get it, that's a hard thing to explain, but we're all sitting,
but yeah.
you know what I'm saying, and like. Because then if you start to say like, shit, you punch on this one time, like, that's a.
It's- And it should be, there should be somebody who can see them. The person that's on, the person, the officer did nothing wrong. We have to say.
So we determined the category. The conduct. Corporate responsible, but we're supposed to respond to consequences.
Yeah, I think you have one of your seconds if you say. So, yes, like, so brave.
Do with the concept.
So as a level 3,
I think the police.
what we have, we don't, want to do
That's perfect, because they've already come and they've done all the actions. If they've done it, but, yeah.
story and.
Yeah.
Or seems to be more than one. 3 days, so they-
And they're welcome.
As a two, but that's okay.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
I think so.
Just very enthusiastic.
Or do you want one category?
Understand. It's alcohol versus tobacco.
Looks like there's some level 2. The issue is what that's more like up to 1 day, half a day, or theoretically no day.
Specific this time.
I don't think the day is ready, but that's irrelevant.
And so therefore you.
Days, 4 days.
I think the question I would ask
That's
is
part
like.
of that conversation.
One,
You did the right
the
thing.
right is the removal to a learning environment.
So-
Yep, she wrote that is that.
They said this is one of the things that probably
I mean. Look at it, like, yeah, so you guys- I mean, obviously it's.
I appreciate that response because, you know, both your kids. A lot of fight sometimes, not this year as much as past year, especially last year, but where students say they no longer feel safe, they actually do some fun. And then they school and obviously that's how many. So very, but
In the moments.
having a kid remain from that fast and even from.
5 minutes?
A minute after whatever.
You have 5 minutes?
Wait.
Up to, and remember.
Does that make sense?
Well, I think if we're really looking for kids to understand the harm of like fighting. In an ideal world, and I haven't seen the philosophies of this ideal situation, but like I would want the kids to fit in here from their own class and say, when you did this is how I felt, this is what this looked like, this is a classroom community, we have mutual agreed upon agreed, like we agree that this is how we're behaving in the state, and we all need to own that, and you. This is what you want to keep us learning about, like in an ideal world, the teacher had the agreement, that they are all fully accountable to your classroom community. And then if you kids really understand, here is how I felt when I did this, here's how were violated, about, again, that takes a lot of work to get to that point. But again, I have
17-year-old and 15-year-olds all three little session of depression, for example. I'm not.
Well, here's the thing, what you say though is about keeping
The ability to look how those questions to get back. And level right? Social emotional support or whatever that was to be. And for the student receiving that, I say automatically start getting started. I'm not sure that students in I live anyway. Yes, okay, like,
I like.
because I'm sitting in a classroom. How much you just and it's not their job to graph and say, it's the other continuity.
Now, freshmen can't go in
When there's no work or not, they're the, who are the adults need to jump in and say,
Yes.
we care for you. The criticism of this way, which sort of practice is that what I guess is that students that are hard, what's part of the whole, don't feel that something is with I almost got punched in the all the time. And what, whether it's true or not, it's more seconds, that's their feeling. So by personally by removing that student from the classroom, and then we have to allow that student to be out, then you're coming back, but everyone starts to have to be. Like it has to be a separation, it has to be that.
Well, and I think that's the thing that has to come before that actually, and like sort of question. So first, the kid process with the teacher, whether it's teacher, or you bring someone out, like process with them, and a lot of work has to be done with the kids themselves to like prepare them to be ready to hear this, right? But I think when you think about restoring the harm to community, which is really that's where the work is like them restoring the harm from the people. Right.
I think we should.
Accountability of the so-called perpetrator, for lack of a better term. Right, and so.
Yeah, but
And that's not really, you know, like. So it's.
Yes.
I know what this will be. I know.
And here's what I've learned, I would encourage to say like, this is what I've learned, and this is what I'm going to work on. But I hear. Right, like certain class, it has to be very, like the classroom environment has to be ready, and there has to be an established classroom culture for something like that to occur. You know,
Even if it's flip sides too. I think this is just conversation. Confident or outspoken, really students. When someone does something slightly wrong, and all of a sudden. Empowerment, you just did that, and that's against the law. Well, no, you know, it wasn't against the law. It's almost like, I mean, I don't even know.
yeah.
This happened to I know today. And someone was sending a picture of someone else. And girl sitting next to me was like, you just took my picture. You have. So I wouldn't say it's
I think when we do restorative conversations, a lot of work prior to the.
Mr. Lorraine?
Speak from my experience, I've done very poorly because the parties were not ready, right?
That's
Like,
right.
and so the work comes in, like, it's also like, it's not just all out and. It is like, here's the person, like, you even give to like, to read, but like a sentence, like, it's very, should be very. Because I hear that too, right? Like, like, there's a whole host of things that haven't happened, but. I think at some points you do, for the most part, they try and like manage electronics, because they're trying to work on preparing kids for conversations like this, right? Like to get them ready for these kinds of things, to not get, to acknowledge like what they've done, like how they hold themselves accountable. Yeah, we just didn't write it.
Was it not, it's not.
Are we
points.
like
Yeah.
kicked out? We didn't write it.
Well, you're not gonna get-
So who was?
We were moving it through the entire.
It's still, but just to answer the questions for who was. We paid the students.
Right? Like, so
Just about.
Right, but it did, but then 10% impacting that, it's still hard to say, right?
Where does 6 can do? Okay.
Okay, and because I grew up as members in that really are well versed in this. I'm just gonna point a couple of things out to everybody else as we, before we share out. So a couple of things, these were designed to be really complicated.
Sure. I want to make sure you're captured in the minutes. Thank you.
Yes.
So these were designed to be really complicated. There is no right or wrong answer. There are definitely layers to each of these situations. Application of the book is often sometimes interpreted differently by different people. We have 5 deans in this building.
Did you find it challenging?
Yes.
Okay, was that, no, okay,
Now it came to a pretty.
okay, okay, I just want to know if that.
So 5 deans in
That's the
the
thing is wrong.
The 5 deans in the building, very often they confer on the more complicated cases so that they are reaching a consensus, because there could be some debate as you all had in your groups. We, probably did emphasize it, but I'm not sure that everybody heard it. When you look at the levels, the word may is listed on each one of those levels. And that word is very clear, but often overlooked. So even though we are sometimes at a level 3, where it says may result in 1 to 3 days of ISR. Word may means that you don't have to use it at all. When you get to level 4 and level 5, may result in 1 to 4 days of out of school suspension. Again, you do not have to use it at all. The emphasis being on every single scenario is different. The kids are different, their backgrounds, what they bring to the situation are different, and their willingness to engage and learn from their mistakes is different every single time. Heard some great conversations about what would happen, the difficulty in trying to implement some of the more restorative measures. That's what we're interested to hear about as you share out, because how do you restore harm? Somebody has legitimately been harmed, or even just feels that they have been harmed. How can we be certain that whatever we try is going to result in people feeling restored? And that is very, very difficult work. So even though they're not in the room, I do want to shout out all the teams that we have because they engage in that part of the work. That's the really, really difficult part of restorative justice. So we're gonna go around to go in order. Okay, starting with scenario number 1. Do you ask what scenario?
No, just someone.
Everybody can kind of just look it over. This was a situation with a classroom fight. 2 students got into a fight in the classroom. As a result, some of the students in the class felt that they were no longer safe. But at the same time, the reason for the fight was a little complicated. One of the students was triggered by a comment that was made during the classroom discussion. And there's some childhood trauma involved with that student. Both students seem to be willing to acknowledge that they could have handled things differently. But again, one of the students has been in a fight previously, and the other student had a separate but unrelated disciplinary incident just 2 weeks ago. So what did group 1 come up with?
And definitely tell us your B, like what category was this? What category, what misconduct, so we can see where you landed the plane and then.
So the category we found was inappropriate physical contact. And it was the second section, excessive physical aggression. And for that one, for the appropriate response level, because this appears to be Robin's second fight, we started with 3, and because this appears to be Taylor's first fight, we started with level 2. We determined that the vaping incident of Taylor was not relevant to this particular issue, so that did not really to elevate Taylor's category of 1. In terms of the appropriate response and consequence, we went back and forth on Robin, especially because it was their second fight. And then we actually jumped to discussion to go back to figure out what was the appropriate response or consequence. So we talked about who was harmed, and we concluded that everyone was harmed. And, per the paragraph, several students in the classroom felt that they no longer felt safe. So maybe as to Robin, some sort of removal from the classroom and half day, full day, in school suspension might allow the classroom to heal. And then upon Robin's return to the classroom, there was some talk about, what would you call that?
So I think there was a lot of levels of conversation about how to restore the harm in this. And one of the things I talked about is when we were talking about a classroom restoring harm, there's a lot of levels on how to make that work. In an ideal world, you would have a classroom where there's community agreements that everyone agrees upon, and then they hold each other accountable to those. So when you have a restorative circle in a classroom that's had a fight, they can have that with amongst each other. I also acknowledge that that's very hard to do in a classroom, specifically of maybe freshmen, because you have to be mature enough and be willing to hear feedback and also have the structure in place for it to be productive. I think there's room for sort of conversation between Robin and Taylor. I think there's work to be done with Robin and with social worker about these triggering words and where is that coming from. I think that's it. Yeah, so also acknowledging that before we're starting a conversation with the whole classroom, a lot of work has to be done to kind of process the incident of an actual fight in the classroom. Kids need to be able to talk about that, how do they feel? If they're feeling unsafe, then that's an important piece of it too. How do you help them feel safe in a classroom where there has been a physical altercation?
And just a quick thing is that I do think the community generally worries about the students in the classroom and how their healing goes forth when this happens. So it was great to hear that there are options to deal with the students in the classroom, and for healing to occur.
Any clarifying questions or comments? Because this one really does highlight the difficulty in that restoration process and the time involved. It's really a big reason why it often doesn't happen to the extent that was described by this group. But with more instructional time is, if we have to then come back on a separate day and hold a restorative circle, teachers are not always open and willing to participate in that. And like you said, sometimes there are difficulties getting students to take it seriously. I do want to highlight that in-school reflection here at OPRF is the best that I've ever seen. Actual time for reflection with a program called Third Millennium, where students actually work their way through a module specific to the type of incident. So in this case, there would be a module on fighting or aggression and things like that in the situation. With pre and post tests, students actually do come out with the learning outcomes. So school reflection is definitely not just sitting in a room reflecting what you've done. It's an education process and it's counted as education.
I will also add that when you think harm, think the same way we think in the medical community. If you break a bone and you don't get it treated, it will heal incorrectly. And you may have a limp, you will never heal from it correctly unless you go get the cast on it or whatever you need. That is what the restorative action is. And so anytime we skimp on that, though sometimes we're like, you can't miss class time, we just have to keep going on, you'll never have true healing in that space if you don't allow it to play out the way it needs to.
Also, the word trauma was inserted into this scenario intentionally. We actually have somebody in our midst whose title is a trauma interventionist in this group. So anytime that there may be something at the group happened before the student probably became an OPR student and need processing and how to navigate the harm that's done to them internally and not have an effect and overflow into their classroom environment. Certificates is a great resource for that as well. And is listed, I believe, on the poster as a resource. Okay, so in the interest of time, we're going to move to scenario 2. Oh, So this was about basically a smoking in the bathroom. There appears to be marijuana. The search does turn up evidence. The specific number given that the marijuana was weighed turned out to be 1.2 grams precisely. Jonas, however, he admits to what he's doing, but relays that he's been feeling really down lately. His grandmother passed away 2 weeks ago, and they were really close. He's even thinking about dropping out of school, and his grades have really suffered. So, have some background information. He has not been in trouble or at least gotten caught for anything before. No disciplinary incidents. But he moved to.
Okay, so, I mean, the category was the alcohol, drug, tobacco one, and then we possessed, like you said, more than 1 gram of marijuana, which would be the category 4 on the chart. But then you said you would kind of recommend more of like a level 3 one, just because it was, he had never been in trouble for before, and plus like what he had been going through lately before that. So then we thought like.
And he admitted it.
And he admitted it, and it was and consented to the search. So, yeah, the in-school reflection, and then, we thought like, I mean, obviously like, what was the root of the problem was that his grandmother had died, so like, definitely referring to a social worker, kind of coming up with a plan, the social worker maybe check-ins and stuff, and then the social worker from there could like, I don't know, figure out grief counseling and stuff. And then, the substance abuse education or substance, dependency education, either way, just like talking about that, and then, you know, like you said, the in-school reflection, like there's the module during that they kind of work through and talk about, and like they have a conversation.
Something else we.
Did you say how many days too?
Not 1 or 2,
Yeah. Something else, we were asked to consider. We were asked to consider who was harmed. And what we realized is it's more than just the student that's being harmed. Anybody who walks in that bathroom after this kid with an allergy or asthma is going to be harmed, could potentially be harmed. Set off an asthma attack, that is the worst case scenario, but also the family is harmed by realizing that their child is in this state, and now that's going to affect the entire thing. So that needs to be considered in referral for grief counseling as well.
All right, and this first, any feedback or clarifying questions? And this highlights some of the same things in the first group, but in this one in particular, you can get very creative when you're thinking about how to restore that harm, because at first glance it doesn't appear nobody else is in the bathroom. What happens though when you do this type of restorative justice that you're talking about, with student treatment counseling, receives the access to the social worker, and all these things, this is a situation where even that security guard would look and say, I found this kid smoking in the bathroom and nothing happened. It's very difficult to overcome that perception, to maybe get labeled as somebody that is a problem because they got caught in the bathroom. They don't hear about all of the restorative practices that happen afterwards. But getting creative means sometimes, we've done this, Mr. Lee has been a part of this as well. As a result of their education around substance abuse, can the student create a poster during their time in ISR that can be hung on a school wall, advertising to other people that haven't gotten caught, but maybe they think about the dangers, everything that they've learned, and they can use your campaigns. There are ways to try to attempt restorative practices in just very creative ways.
I would just add that you all were very nice and considerate. And the reason I said that is a couple of things. So the reason the weights change is because when you exceed a gram, it goes to the thought of selling versus just possessing for yourself. Again, though, you're considering other situations that the child has brought to you, which is what we have to do when we're doing restorative action. But I also want to say that while we're in this space, it's nice and calm. The court of public opinion, though, is something that Oak Park and River Forest does very well. So remember, the principal and people are getting emails about how we've lost control of the bathrooms and how our children are having issues, and so it becomes this push of we've got to make this stop. But then we have somebody who's in grief, right? How do we balance the two so that you're doing what the child who was having the incident needs, and also quell the thought that we are allowing students to just now. So now when you have grief, you can just go to the bathroom and smoke. That's not what we're saying. So it's almost like how do we then communicate that so that we know we are being compassionate to the child, but we would do this universally for all children as we're doing this. So bravo for that. Just remember, there is still work to be done after this happens to the people who are like, what? That.
And also just at 1.2 grams, it shows you that you have to draw a line somewhere, but basically 0.2 grams away, this kid would have been on the other side of it. But less than 1 gram is delineated differently according to the orientation. So just something to think about is that the word may is intentionally inserted there. You do kind of have to draw a line, but you have to take the circumstances into consideration.
And then remembering as a board here, this literally says we aren't allowed to put it at a level 3, which is what you chose to do, a 3. Which I understand, it makes perfect sense to me, but when we are making these decisions to change the book, when we say things like that, oh, that's awful, because in our mind we're thinking, oh, that's awful, 3 grams, get it, You're not thinking about the 0.2 and the fact that now we've locked this child, if we lock them in there, to a level 4, and we're not supposed to back up, but we did in this case.
What if the scale wasn't shared correctly?
Mrs. Louis made this get us there. Mrs. Louis made me get those skills.
Actually, I was going to put that out as well, even though it would still be treated as a level 4 according to the book, but they do have the freedom to administer whatever the consequence is. Discretion.
It's a several. Oh.
It
Thank you.
says several ones, so there had to be someone else involved.
Oh, I mean, you could interpret it that way. Actually, the way it was written was that the students had been sold for.
Is there, it was left them in there, or does it just say them?
Just say the burnt ends.
Oh, okay.
For repurposing.
Can I just add, David, too, sorry, the amount comes from the ability to give to other people. Okay, so it, and I think that's where like the point too, like, we don't know if this kid's sharing it, we don't know if it's all his own. And these are all assumptions, like when you're in the moment talking to the kid, trying to figure this out. But after a certain point, when you have a certain amount of things you're bringing into a school, the danger and intent, like, it just increases the danger. So it was part of the village, but it was also part to kind of say like, okay, this is personal use versus maybe not. So I don't know if that clarifies.
All right. Group 3. Summary of this incident. Now, this is one of those ones where the court of public opinion comes into play, because we are talking about so at first glance is reported as a gun in possession of a student at an athletic practice. After the search is conducted, it turns out to be not a firearm. And I did have to look up Illinois on this. The BB gun is considered pneumatic, and is therefore not a firearm. And that is delineated in the education plan as well. But upon further investigation, it turns out that it does not even belong to the student. So it was brought in his bag unintentionally, left in his bag by an older brother. You could bring into question, how do we know this? Are we going to believe this? Let's hear that from Group 3.
Yes, so this would fall under that like firearms possession with a lookalike, which carries a 4 or 5 response. But in our discussion, assuming all things are believable in this scenario, we recommend like a response that is something that is handled by probably the coach, the dean involved, and the whole basketball team. One, because even sending Jaden, who's the student, who was caught with BB gun, to the in-school reflection room, like, what is he going to reflect on? Do I need to check my bag every single time before I leave? Like, it's not his fault that the BB gun is in the bag, right? Like, his brother put it in there, the brother messes up and says, yeah, I didn't think I was gonna take the bag that day, so putting him in the reflection room makes no sense, because there's nothing to reflect on. It's not his fault. And we think it's best to be handled by the team because they're the coach and the dean involved. And one, because all parties involved need to understand that no one's at fault in this. You can easily develop animosity amongst the players because it's like, why did you snitched on me, you got me in trouble, that kind of thing. And one, the kid who did report it needs to understand, like, you did nothing wrong in this scenario, you did exactly what you should have done, you reported what you assume was a firearm, and that's a safety concern, and we wanna make sure everyone's safe in the building. But it's important to address Jaden's situation with the entire team and help them understand, like, the kid didn't do this, he didn't bring this intentionally. One, he didn't do it intentionally, two, it's not a firearm, it's BB gun. That kind of thing, and I also think, and hearing everyone else talk about their stuff, like, Jaden probably needs to have some like counseling, and because word spread on the basketball team fast, and word's gonna spread fast around the school about a scenario like this, so he needs some kind of counseling to help him get through that, and understand, like, this story is gonna change a million times as it hits everyone's ears, so you need to be equipped to handle that and understand, like, how to deal with that as a high school kid, because that's gonna be rough with the connotations that this kind of scenario brings.
I have a question.
Shoot.
Does anything change if the principal comes to the coach and says, I've got 9 parents who are on the basketball team who believe their children saw a gun? And
I found the coach, because this is me, I'm speaking from like coach for a second, it was like, yeah, like, I'll talk to him and I'll explain the scenario, because at the end of the day, this is a kid. And to try to treat him like anything other than a kid, and explain the scenario, like, it's not, whether you believe it, like, assuming all things are true, like, this is not his fault, this is a simple mistake. How many times have you brought something that wasn't yours because it was in your bag that someone else used, or you brought something fixed and that was yours like this? We're not gonna punish this kid and hold his feet to the fire for something that's not his fault. And if the parents wanna get mad at, like, me as the adult, like, I'll take that fire then, because that kid doesn't deserve that.
The thing is, an outside authoritative adult said it wasn't a gun. So it's not like the school covering it up as a conspiracy or something. The police were here, they said it wasn't a gun, it was a BB gun, so. You know, if the parents are upset, they could easily call the police and they would tell them, no, man, it wasn't a gun, it was a BB gun. We got a report right here if you want a copy. Let us know, as opposed to if the police hadn't came, deans came, principals came, and then they said it wasn't a gun, it was a BB gun, then everyone would think conspiracy. Okay, you guys are just protecting this kid because he's on the team or something like that, but in our scenario, the police came and said it was a BB gun.
Any other feedback or questions?
I think as a parent of 3 OPRS basketball players, I agree that words coming from the coach probably mean more than a parent or anyone else. So I think that's really important to empower the coach to either talk to the parents and obviously the team. And the coach has the ability to almost quash discussion if y'all don't need to be talking about this for the next 2 weeks. This is enough and forget it. And that's gonna mean more than a parent said it or even a principal said it.
Yeah, this is, you guys, kudos definitely went with a very restorative response. What about, so that restoration of the team and making sure that everybody feels comfortable, understands the reason why, it can be difficult, from the dean's perspective is also sometimes confidentiality as well. So sometimes a parent will come and say, was the kid suspended, were they arrested? And those are not questions that can't be answered. So the response that comes is, can't answer that, in the nicest way possible. And they will, sometimes even when the kid has been suspended, we have to say, can't answer that. And that is received as, oh, nothing happened. So it's very difficult. And the answer to that, just as administrators, is that this is why this has to be a community effort. in educating everybody around what restorative justice is. So I wish we could have this group as the public relations, on every scenario, because municipal property does receive those concerns, emails about these situations, as where it's traveled very, very fast, and it's very difficult to give a response about what actually happened. And sometimes we do need, members that are actually impacted speaking up to say everything is good. That would be very helpful.
Because these can go to the mental health of people who weren't even in the space. Who you're thinking you just need to restore that of the team who may have been exposed. And it is the child who heard from the child who heard from the person who looked at the picture that this happened, and what do you want to do? Correct. And so these things blow up and grow to such an extent that you are dealing with almost a separate incident than what you see here. And the way I hear you all approaching with compassion and like seeing the kids in terms of this, you haven't once even said, they're probably lying. Like what? That one is for others. They just made it. Like, why don't we get to that level to even have to go there? Because of other things that are unraveling as it goes through. When what we're trying to do is see kids, see people, and people have issues and not think the worst. We assume positive intent, and then we handle the things as they come. So you're a very thoughtful group, and I appreciate that.
Can I add one thing? Is that something that as a community we need to address, or as a school community, like what actually is harm? Because the person that you just described, the friend of a friend of a friend who saw the picture and then read about it on Facebook, you're really not harmed. Like you were at home and you know, you were doing dishes, like you're good. And I just wish that we need to talk about what is harm.
Okay, don't make me tear up.
I just feel that there's too much harm talk.
And there is legitimate harm that is caused, but you have a point here in terms of just making sure we're addressing the true harm that has happened, as opposed to what we have grown it to believe that it was. Would be something that would be very helpful in terms of just education for all. And again, this is not to hurt children or to hurt people. It's to educate us as to, you know, what ends up being information and how we digest information as we receive it versus when we experience it ourselves.
The standard I try to use is if my grandmother would think it was harm. And go on, friend, what would your grandma say?
Could I just add one quick stat, just so it's in the minutes in case anyone the overuse of this idea of harm and trauma in our building does nothing more than actually belittle true harm and trauma that people face. And it's a travesty, the overuse that we have seen it in this building.
I'm so happy to be hearing this tonight because it drives me bananas.
You're not the only one.
Words like that, because people's definition of unsafe is completely.
Triggering us.
So words like unsafe as well, because it's people's understanding of what safe and unsafe is very subjective, and it gets ran with. And by the time you break down and nuance everything, it's really not an issue of safety. You're uncomfortable about something. But yet we teach kids to use these words over and over again, then they become meaningless when there's something really unsafe. You don't believe that it's a safety issue because you just can't even hear about something on the floor, but somebody really has a gun. So what do I believe? Like what, you know, it's almost like crying wolf to a certain extent.
And I hate to say this, we are actually causing unsafe conditions for some other people because we are doing that. So that means that we are possibly causing something to happen to someone else because you're causing a reaction to happen to that person or to that space and things. And we're not thinking that in our moments of running with the story.
Guys, looking at the time, but thankfully, our last group had co-author of the DEP and the founder intervention incident, so we're going to move expedition to the scenario involving social media threats between two students or from one student to another. The words "I'm going to kill you" were used, but basically threats being made over social media. Digging a little deeper, the reason why the kid is upset is that he's being picked on at lunch. And a comment was made, or actually a post was made, about that student's younger brother who does have a disability. So a little complicated, but why the threats were made. Not necessarily an easy solution. The kid still feels like he might swing on the other kid if he sees him. So group 4, what do we do?
Oh, everybody. So we select the category of inappropriate language and expression. Sorry, and or expression. For Kobe, it was threat, including the use of social media to threaten. And I believe we landed for Bryce that it was the verbal, written, and nonverbal threats, put downs, etc. I forget. However, we did recognize that both students were complicit in this, that, and using social media to do it. Bryce's issue was that he posted, he did admit to posting a picture of Kobe's brother, which is what ultimately made Kobe the most upset. Kobe is upset about the post and did say that he wants to continue, that if he thinks he might swing on him. And we decided it was started at level 2. Our responses, each student needed to have a restorative conversation. And hopefully we can get them into a peace circle where we can get them to understand the impact of what each of them did and how that harmed the other person. Hopefully that will settle that. It's a little nuanced because it does say Kobe states if I see Bryce, I might still swing on him. But hopefully in the conversation in the peace circle we can resolve that. And there's no way to determine what would need to happen, if anything needs to happen next, until we actually get to that peace circle part.
Can I ask a question? Why did you go with bullying?
Yeah, that was my question.
For the student with the post about the brother with the disability? I'm just wondering.
Why did we go with bullying for Bryce?
So I will also say that to be bullying, which is something we don't talk about much in our school as well, it has to be a persistent state. And he says he said
He did it multiple times, that's why I said bullying.
but he's repeatedly talking about him, but he also talked about his brother.
Right, so wouldn't that be bullying, cause he's posting it multiple times?
He didn't
I thought
post
that he-
multiple times about the book.
No,
No, but I'm saying that just the general bullying towards the student over and over and over.
Several incidents.
I'm just at, like, I would have gone with bullying.
Yeah, I'm just making sure I don't check on it. About my younger brother who had a disability. So are you saying Bryce is bullying Kobe?
Yeah.
yes,
Oh, doing much.
Well, over social media too, it says,
Right.
See, but remember
So that's only
the
the
one
one-
disability is actually about a student, I mean, it's not specifically written here, it doesn't intend to OPR, it's a younger brother.
But it's affecting
still
it, and that's why he's
spreading, it's
doing it.
harmful.
That's why he's doing it, because he doesn't know his brother, he's just trying to bother him.
So it's a great conversation, guys. Bullying is definitely treated differently, handled with a very specific protocol, like Principal Parker was saying. We have to have documented repeated occurrences over time, and also the other thing is that one person doing the bullying has to be in a perceived position of power over the other. Now, position of power could be interpreted an older student over a younger student, somebody who has a higher position on a team, over somebody who is not, but there are certain protocols that have to be established, you to call it bullying. For the purposes of this exercise, in the end, the question is about how do we restore it? So if we follow the bullying and address it that way, it does kick in another set of supports. But in the end, we've discussed how do we restore the relationship between the two? The method used would actually end up being the same. A peace circle of some sort, conversations about how do we, stop jokes from turning into hurt feelings, or shying away from topics that should not be discussed. I was also looking at, possibly the one in the same category that said use of racial slurs or protected class references directly toward another person's group. Depending on what that both was, you need some information. Or consider using that. This really highlights the difficult job that teams have, because there are, like I said, room for interpretation, opinions on what should have been done differently. And also sometimes people who say even after your processes, I still don't feel good about this situation. Here's what we do then. We'll leave that. We're gonna move into our inner circle guys, so reflection time.
I've been wondering, again, talking about persistent action when it comes to bullying. It is my understanding also that when it comes to bullying, it has to interfere with their academic participation in school. So if it wasn't, to me, exactly why I didn't do it. Like if it's not causing, Kobe to feel like you can't come to school or you can't go to class, then it didn't rise to the level of bullying, even though it's happening consistently. It's not interfering with his attendance or academic ability.
Yeah, I got a couple of change for the insertions. I opened up at CCD. Yes. They get to about 8 o'clock.
You can go in there. As everyone's gathering, one thing I want to point your attention to in the actual grid of the BED, you will notice that at the top where it has the colored sections here, you don't see the word may, like you saw on the other page that I first took your attention to, that spoke about that you don't necessarily have to do the penalties that are here. You can do restorative action, and if that works, you don't have to then do the days. It's absent from the grid. The one change I am making to the BP is I'm writing that in the same way it's written on this page. So it's not really a change. I'm just going to replicate that, because what I realize is as people are reading the book, they're looking here and they don't see the word may. And so they think you gotta give them this. But according to our chart, it's just that the word may was omitted in the space, like, because we were trying to limit the space. Yeah, so I'm gonna write it in there. That will change and you'll see that there in next year's handbook.
Okay, so I think it's all reflective. Just for me, just looking over the process, I'm very happy to hear some of the conversations that came about from groups. Wondering how we can duplicate this type of conversation throughout the school, because there is not often time or space dedicated for it. And we love to figure out how to make that happen. Also, just reflecting on what Linda just said about not making any major changes to the book. Tells us that we have a good building block here, and we can focus on the processes rather than what is on paper. So affecting people's mindsets, changing people's opinions about what our work actually is about. Looking at the book not as something where we are just applying the letter of the law, but trying to do what is in the best interest of both the kids and the school community as a whole.
What's the color?
So it's reflection. So reflecting on this
Oh, this whole thing.
about the BEP and what we just done.
I appreciate the fact that it does give everyone a chance for rehabilitation. I think that's a very important role. I kind of wish at times it was more parental interactive, but I understand the school works with what they have. It's the school, their administration, and it's the students, which is there at the time. But it's a good piece to move forward with.
You know, I was also thinking parental involvement with this, like, what if the parents of the kids that are referred for disciplinary action? What if the parents had to go through what we just went through? And I'm glad that this is actually written out in this grid that is accessible to the public. So that folks understand when their kid or somebody else's kid needs to have a behavior response. That it is well thought out, it's not random, it's not arbitrarily assigned, we're not after you.
I think the fact that other people who are not educated or not in this specific setting, to see how complicated sometimes disciplining or giving students consequences can be. But it's not a one size fit all, it's not cookie cutter. And so what people perceive one person doing is not exactly the same thing or for the same reasons that someone else did it. And so this forces people to see kids as individuals, and I like going through those scenarios, people got to see that kids are individuals, they have real life situations going on, and everything doesn't warrant throwing the book at them or separating them from school. They sometimes just are crying out for help and don't know how to express themselves, so they do things, and just sometimes accidents happen. It's not always that they're intentionally trying to misbehave.
As we were going through this and we were looking at, what could be the supports put in place, it just made me really happy and proud that we have all of these, like, so thoughtful and creative and multidimensional, that there's some kind of a tool for whatever a student needs, and that just made me feel really reassured and definitely adds to my confidence in the behavior plan. And there was something I always do this, I always have some thoughts. Oh, well, when we were going through our scenario 2 and we saw that it would be at a level 4, and we didn't have them made, and I thought, it was just to me kind of horrifying. It's talking about the school suspension and like we can't address what's going on with the student, and then made me feel better. So I think that's going to be a very helpful addition, because we all missed that. We thought, oh my gosh, you have to be a plus suspension. So I think that would be great.
Enjoyed the exercise. As many have already stated, I think it gives others who are not involved in these processes the idea of what the day-to-day looks like when it comes to disruptions or anything that's happening, and like it boils my blood when people say, well, nothing happened, and I'm like, I spent 3 days. It wouldn't felt late for you to say nothing happened. And so I think this does give insight for people to understand like what that looks like, because it's not a one size fit all, it's not a cookie cutter, it's not even the wham bam, thank you ma'am. Like sometimes these things take time and days and investigations and multiple stories and figuring out harm on multiple levels and how to restore that for not just who we see in front of us, but the multiple people who were affected or could have been affected. And it's tedious sometimes. So I appreciate that people get to get a crash course in it.
It just reminded me of how important it is to teach the skills. I think a lot of times we think about these as consequences and that's just gonna fix it, right? Like give them out of school suspension and they're gonna come back all ready to go. And it's, I've never seen that happen. So, teaching reading is important, teaching math is important, teaching these skills are equally important.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I agree with what everybody else is saying. It's just a good exercise, and it does show how many programs we do have in the school already, and also like you guys were saying, how hard it is to decide it. But then I was also thinking about like with the out of school suspensions, like kind of what you just said, like when we were applying it to our scenario, it's like, I don't know if I understand why we really have them actually, unless there's like actual like safety threat where the student does need to be removed from the school, because how are any restorative practices gonna be put in place, how's anything gonna be safe if the student is just at home with nobody to talk to? You know?
Exactly.
So that's, I guess, the big thing that I was thinking about from it.
And I really enjoyed this exercise and learned so much from everyone's input and thoughts. And I thought it was really important that we're not just, a lot of times the criticism of a restorative practice is that no one cares about the victim, no one cares about the victim. But the way it's being implemented here, and I don't know obviously how it's implemented elsewhere, but we really do have a focus on who was harmed and how to heal that harm. The harm is never going to be fixed per se, but we can all heal and everyone heals. So it was great to have that at work and to see it at work. And it wasn't just like deal with the perpetrator, call it a day and everyone's going to be fine. I mean, I love the restorative for everybody. So this is, very impressive. So thank you. And I agree that this needs to get out in the community more.
Yeah, I was just thinking, where it gets difficult is if you have a parent whose child they feel like is being harmed, they're gonna be perhaps the hardest to deal with. But, and I don't know that you do a lot of community-wide workshops. I remember one way back when. It'd be interesting to know what a community-wide workshop on understanding our behavior education plan restorative practices would produce. At least you get the receptive people that want to know more, who could spread the word, that might be a good idea.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, Ricky. I'm thinking community council would be the perfect place to do the same exercise. Every other parent group and community that we have in the school, I think is potentially a really good target. They would take away the same lesson that I did tonight of how complex these issues are and how really artful it is to determine the right outcomes. So I agree with what other people have said. I think the more parents in particular that we can expose to scenarios like this or exercises like this, I think that you'd be better off as a school and more understanding of the school community to how difficult these things are. I also just want to say, I think a lot of schools talk about restorative justice. I'm really grateful that this is a school that walks the walk. That we're not perfect, and we never will be perfect, but we try really hard to adhere to restorative principles, and we take it super seriously. I'm really grateful for that.
Children are the fruits of the tree. They are the sum total at this age of what they've been taught and then what they've learned. Because we sometimes teach and talk at children, but then there's that which they learn, and they learn through what they see and what they hear and what they do. None of them are inherently evil. None of them came to destroy the school. None of them came to destroy lives, no matter the color, no matter the socioeconomic status, no matter the religion, no matter what they wear, no matter what they say. They came because, besides it being a law that they have to be in school, they came because someone said, you will learn here, we will educate you. And the education is holistic. It can't just be the sciences, the math, the English, the history, the world language, the PE. It can't just be that. We have to grow them as people holistically. That comes with bumps, which, if we're honest, we were all a bump at some point too. And Mr. Diggs said the word patience. It takes a lot of patience to be able to say, yes, my child may have been harmed, but it's more important for this process of healing to happen than for me to stand and jump up and down and complain about my child's solo hurt. So part of being in a community is that we have to sacrifice some of our individualism in order to think about the people next to us. And that's something we're going to have to grow as a community. That's not just about how I'm doing and how I'm feeling, but it's also about how my neighbor is feeling. And I don't want to have access to something that my neighbor doesn't have access to, because that is inequity. When my neighbor can have access to something that should be for all of us, but you only get it because you complained or you wrote a letter or you did a certain thing, that's not right. We have to fix it for our whole community so that we don't have spaces where we can see certain kids getting targeted for certain things because of the way we have been hardwired. And though we may not admit it, we are hardwired in our media to think, get the bad guy. And sometimes we turn the kids into the bad guy when it was just the behavior that needs to be addressed and changed. But we turn them into the bad guy and the society says, get the bad guy. We don't want to think of our children as the bad guy. That is why this document exists. And we have to trust the individuals who've been charged with doing the work to do what we did tonight and know that they're doing it with fidelity to help all of our children get to what we say they all deserve, which is a future past high school. So thank you so much. I'm so encouraged and inspired by you because you took an opportunity to see the kids and to hear their story and to make decisions based on that versus the incident. So thank you so much, and we do need to grow the conversation. I don't have the answer for all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Linda and David, for just a terrific program tonight. And just in the interest of time, we're gonna need to adjourn, so I move to adjourn CCP meeting tonight, so I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.